you put on that badge, you took an oath to do right.
That I will support the Constitution of the United States.
I took an oath when I became an officer. I broke that oath.
That I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to the state of North Carolina.
There are corrupt law enforcement officers out there, and I was one of them.
Yes, they were law enforcement officers, but in my book, no more than thugs with badges.
From a position of not having any supervision and basically having carte blanche authority to do whatever they wanted to do, they went wild.
This guy, this one here. The agency itself was corrupt from the top to the bottom.
Leadership to come from the top.
It was a culture of corruption.
Back in 2002, I was requested to come in, do an investigation into an agency in the southeastern district of North Carolina. The request, which came in through the district attorney's office, was about an alleged corruption into a law enforcement agency there in Robinson County.
It's arguably the largest county in the state geographically, population base of about 135,000 people. Roughly, it's a third Indian, a third black, and a third white.
One of our defendants in this case, James Hunt, was one of our first cooperators to come in and help us break the case.
I'll never forget it. It was December the 31st, 1988, and I started my law enforcement career that day, and I was really proud.
James Hunt was able to tell us about his law enforcement career and how he got started, which I think is important, because it tells how an individual goes to basic law enforcement training and they come out and they have a sense of pride about them and they really want to do a good job.
And I waited a long time for it, and you know, it was just something I really wanted to do.
Before becoming employed with the Robinson County Sheriff's Department, I actually started his career with a small department there in Robinson County. He then left and went to a larger department in another part of the state where he received most of his training.
It was just real professional, and the atmosphere was really good.
There was accountability, that each individual officer was held accountable.
Having those rules made me a better worker because I knew what I could and couldn't do and what I was supposed to do. And when you know what you're supposed to do and this is how you're supposed to do it, it makes your job a little bit easier, I feel.
He stayed there for a while, and because of family reasons and personal reasons, he ended up moving back to the area from which he was raised.
I gave up a lot of money to move back, but I was ready to get married, settle down with my wife, and raise a family. So I took that big loss just to move back home.
He will tell you that this agency was not as professional as the agency where he had previously came from.
But I went on, and I enjoyed being a deputy.
James Hunt started working part-time highway interdiction out on I-95. There was one incident where they were working with another law enforcement officer from another state, and at the end of the shift that day, they recognized the car running a high rate of speed, found that the car had been stolen. During the stop, a struggle ensued.
So I jump out, I come around, I snatch open the driver's door, I reach in, I put my right arm around his head, I grab his left arm with my left hand, and I began to pull him out of the car. When I did, he took his right hand, reached in his waistband, and pulled out a .357 Magnum, and he stuck it to my chest and pulled the trigger. And I was out of work for almost a year. I had made several seizures out there and had made some pretty big seizures. And there's an award called the National Deputy Sheriff of the Year Award. And out of 2,500 people, they chose me. biggest thing that ever happened to me.
But as time went on, he saw that in order for him to progress within the agency, he had to adhere to what other people were doing. And some of the people were mentoring him. And everything kind of went south from there.
When I come back to work, the sheriff called me in there. He said, that boy out there with you, he said, you better keep an eye on him. And I'm like, Ralph, why? Why should I keep an eye on him? He said, here's why. He said, when I came sheriff, he said, everybody talked about how this boy was crooked, how this boy was stealing money and having dealings with drug dealers. And he said, I don't trust him. He said, but I'm gonna put him out there with you. He said, I want you to keep an eye on him. I had developed a relationship with him already. I told him what the sheriff said. I told him what the sheriff told me about him. He said, I knew that. He said, I knew he was gonna do that. The more I worked back there with him, the more I learned how it was a dog-eat-dog world back there. One day I was talking to a young lady on the telephone. We was out on the interstate. She wasn't there or nothing like that. And when I got off the telephone with her, my partner comes over there and gets in the truck with me. He says, I'm gonna show you what I've been trying to teach you for so long. He breaks out the recorder, he rewinds it back and plays it. And it's me talking to that lady on my cell phone. He said, now what do you think would happen if I took that to your wife? I said, oh, that would be ugly. He said, you see how easy it is to get you? He said, you've been got just like that. The more I worked with him, I began to go along with whatever he said because I really, at that point, I got scared to death of it.
He was teaching highway interdiction all over the state. He was all over the country. He was doing all of this teaching. It's like he would say, he was on cloud 9. He was at the pinnacle of his employment. And then things turned for the worse. What happened is that he then became entwined with a group of individuals whom he looked up to because in his eyes they were doing great things in the community having to do with law enforcement. And at that point is when he was taught the things that ultimately brought him and everyone else down.
Very early in my tenure, there were allegations of, shortcuts that were being taken in order in investigations. And I really think that that's when it started. They had a green light to do pretty much whatever they wanted to do as long as it made the sheriff look good. He was content with what they were doing regardless of how they were doing it. And as a result, this just culture of corruption, so to speak, just started to grow. This wasn't something that just started. This was going on for years, administrations. So what you have to say is that, the people in the community there are like, man, that place there, I don't trust anybody. You could be somebody from another part of the country that could come in here and work, but because you work there, they associate you with previous administrations.
It used to be, when I first came down here, it was a good place to live. But as the years went by and all the drugs and the stuff come in, it got terrible. I wanted to leave it. Maybe people would say, well, the law ain't doing nothing about it. They ain't on it. They ain't going to help you. I just lost all my respect for them. From a position of not having any supervision and basically having carte blanche authority to do whatever they wanted to do, they went wild. Clearly violated people's rights, hurt people, stole from people. It literally went from the top down, that anything went. They were the sheriff's department.
Well, it was here at my sister's. It was a Mexican, and he'd come up in the yard, and they was hid out there in the pack house, and they come up there, and he told him he was under arrest. He grabbed him and he handcuffed him, and then he threw him down on the ground and got to beating him with his pistol. Blood was just pouring all down his face.
the corruption, the violence, the laws that were broken, the theft, the just pure lack of justice is the worst that I had ever seen in my entire career.
We really didn't have any professionalism when I went to the sheriff's department. It was more political.
Patrick Ferguson was a juvenile detective.
You can do whatever you want to do within that sheriff's department. Yeah, so we done a raid in Maxton. For the information, we had received that it was supposed to be a large quantity of money inside a locked bedroom. And we even drove an unmarked patrol car up into the residence and activated the blue lights.
I noticed a police car pulled in my yard, Then all of a sudden, I hear him hollering, "Get down," and my back door kicks open. And then I look up, and I know it ain't the laws because they got masks on and got a crowbar in their hand.
I kicked open the door. The bedroom door was locked. We entered the bedroom, the master bedroom. We ramshacked looking for the cash was supposed to have been there. I didn't see any cash there, and my co-defendant assaulted one of the victims inside the residence.
They held him down at gunpoint, kicking him, telling him he had money, where was it at, and told him if he opened his mouth again after they was asking him questions, that they was gonna blow his brains out.
We exited the residence just in time because when someone called it into the sheriff's department, we heard it over the police radio.
They really wasn't what you call looking. They was more or less in a hurry to get what they can get and get out without getting caught.
But I mean, it had gotten so bold that we would, use actual police cars in our home invasions.
Well, after a little bit went by, we found out that it was a couple of sheriffs here in Robeson County.
Yeah, I went to the sheriff's department and talked to the detective in this area. I told who the car belonged to.
But nothing was ever done about it. No investigation was done or nothing. It was just swept away.
It ain't much, it makes you feel bad, but they supposed to be the law,
These people were terrorized. They'll tell you even to this day they don't trust the police. May never ever trust them again. I think another aspect of the case that is important is that the use of informants that these officers had.
They made it look to us that everything was fine. You sell your drugs, you help us lock up people.
They would exchange vehicles so the officers could go off with their girlfriends. The drug dealer informants would then take their vehicles around in the community and pull up to other drug dealers' houses, competition, cut blue lights, the sirens on, watch everybody run, and then get on a loudspeaker and laugh at them.
Carry guns on drug deals, participate in searches.
It was just crazy.
And they cross the lines between what is professional and what is personal, and that ultimately leads to what is criminal.
The Sheriff's Department had developed a form which would track the expenditures. The drug guys in the drug unit were given various amounts of money, a couple $1,000s, and they were supposed to track their spending of the money on these forms. What we found was that the forms were being forged.
But on them vouchers, I signed a lot of blank ones, you know what I mean? And then when it come out in court, I had some on there with my signature, and they would be like $500 and $600, $700. And I know for a fact I hadn't got that kind of money, you know what I mean? Say for instance, I owed the audit $100 and I didn't have it. And I got an extra expenditure form. But what I'll do is I already got that informant's name down there, so I'm gonna put down there that I paid that informant another $100 for another case. And I'll go in the file and find a case that person's done and just put that case number down there. As I paid them $100 for working that case for information given sometimes. But basically, I'm just putting back that $100 into $25,000 without actually having to give it up out of my pocket. It's basically taken from the asset fund. It's basically what was happening, and that's how it was done. And there were some instances where people's names were forged, numbers was changed.
100% of the cases are built on the credibility and the work of those investigating officers. And when they lost their credibility with us, even though they were still actively working cases and making arrests and they were coming into the court system, we ultimately had to make the hard decision. We weren't going to prosecute them because ultimately little things grow into big things, and big things can blow up. And when it blows up, it's too late.
The agency itself was corrupt from the top to the bottom.
I think I worked at least 9 years. I never done anything, you know, to break the law until I fell into some financial hardship. A childhood friend propositioned me. All I had to do was just stop his car. I didn't have to get out my car or anything. All I had to do was just stop his car, make a vehicle stop on his car, and he would give me $5,000 just to do that. It went from stopping that car to staging drug raids. But at the same time, you know, I felt dirty. I was still ashamed of myself. It went from home invasions to crossing state lines, robbing a drug dealer, and kidnapping.
We're on their way back with them to North Carolina. Had to stop and get some gas at a gas station, at which time one of the officers, Patrick Ferguson, was left with the bad guys, the drug dealers from Virginia. They were able to get out of their restraints, overpowered him, and was running to get away as a gunfight ensues in the parking lot, which all of this was caught on videotape. In the van that they were hauling these guys in was, you know, over $200,000 in cash. The officers at that point became frightened, scared that the good police were going to show up and catch them, that they just jumped in vehicles and left the area, left the van there and left the kidnapped victims there. So, you know, with Patrick Ferguson, Vince Sinclair, and some of these other guys, very violent. I can tell you an incident where they went to a house. They had some information that some Hispanic folks had some drugs and money, and they were going to do a home invasion. When they get to they actually go to the wrong residence. When they get to the residence, the Hispanic folks that are there don't speak English. So they're trying to get these people to tell them where the drugs and money's at. So what do?
So one of the officers exit out of the residence and goes to his patrol car and bring back a lighter fluid and a cigarette lighter. And they proceeded to torture two of the victims with the lighter fluid and the cigarette lighter. They will put it on his back, and they'll light it, and then they'll put it out and try to force him to tell them where the drug was at. Victims kept telling them that they didn't have any drugs in their residence. And then we left the residence. There was no drugs in that residence, nor money.
What happened? People reported back to the sheriff's department, to this agency, what was going on. Hey, listen, I'm telling you, your cops are coming out here and they're doing this stuff to us. And what was being done about it? Nothing. I think what was said was, I hope that ain't true.
It gives you a sense of freedom and a sense of being untouchable.
They were tempted with all this money and all these drugs and all this property. They started rationalizing amongst themselves of how to do these crimes, and that it really wasn't crimes we're committing, it's just we're getting paid for what we're doing. And they began to steal large quantities of money. They were stealing personal property, TVs, satellite cards, jewelry. Steve Lovin and James Hunt, they sit down and formulated when they were stealing money off the highway, because they were interdiction officers. They formulated a plan. They said, listen, we're not going to steal any money off of anything that's less than $100,000, because we know that the government's not going to send $100,000 down the road.
There was an instance where we stole like $50,000 off of a traffic stop. And when the money got to the bank and got counted, We later learned that the money was short like $130,000. And my partner's like, wait a minute now, we know how much we got. We got $50,000 of that money. You got 25 and I got about 25. Somebody else is dipping into the cookie jar. In fact, my partner had an instance where he seen our boss take a bundle of the money and stick it in his desk drawer. Now, as far as laundering the money, we had a business where we would train people and people would pay us. Lawn care company.
I knew roughly how much money they were making, somewhere in the neighborhood of $25,000 to $30,000 in salary. They were acquiring boats, motorcycles, new cars, going on cruises together, going to have LASIK surgery together. And I know what the state of North Carolina pays me, and I get paid considerably more than they do. And I can't afford all those things. And I was just puzzled as to how they were accumulating their stuff based on their salaries.
The signs were there. It's just nobody looked. But if you see someone that's taking trips to Vegas and cruises and buying Harleys and all these different things, and you know how much they make, you need to look. You really need to look. You need to keep your eyes open, your ears open. Look for the telltale signs.
Nobody is above the law. And when an officer does something that's criminal, an officer is going to get charged.
With the help of federal agencies, state agencies, our own investigators, U.S. prosecutors, state prosecutors, were able to come together, investigate these crimes, and we're able to, at some point in time, about 6 years later, start bringing people into justice, and these people started pleading guilty to crimes that were committed down there.
When an officer or an investigator comes to me and essentially tells me that a police department or a sheriff's office is so rife with corruption that there is no meaningful way that the state government can take care of that matter, then we sit up and take notice. And there's no question but that was the case in this situation, that you, in the end, have had more than 20 officers have to make the trip into federal court, not as investigators but as defendants. There's very clearly a situation that the state government can't address adequately because of the rampant nature of it in the department. But one thing that we do have that the state does not have is we have investigative grand juries. There are grand juries that meet in the Eastern District of North Carolina every week. We put witnesses in front of those grand juries, and it's amazing to me how many people will tell you things that they would not tell you out on the street, but when put in front of 23 of their fellow citizens under oath with a penalty of perjury if they don't tell the truth begins to come out. We also have statutes and the penalties that are associated with them that really can bring the power of the federal government to bear. In this case in particular, we brought RICO charges, racketeering charges. And it's a shame when we have to turn the power of those statutes on a law enforcement agency. But when you find an agency that is in an organized way working to violate the law in everything from satellite card piracy to kidnapping and violent crime, then you step back and you reflect on the purposes behind statutes like that and you use them.
You know, it's a trap. It's very easy to get into, but very hard to get out. And it can cost you your life. I actually threw away my life. I threw away my law enforcement career, and I threw away my family over drugs and money. And it's not worth it.
Well, what I can tell you about Mr. Ferguson is right now he's serving a 20-year sentence in federal prison for doing home invasions, kidnapping, thefts, beatings, setting human beings on fire. There again, a whole smorgasbord of crimes. Now you say, well, how in the world does a juvenile officer get involved in something like that? Well, I make my own schedule. I do what I want to do when I want to do it. There's no oversight. There's no policy. There's no procedure enforcement. I socialize with people outside of the agency that I probably shouldn't be socializing with.
Not a day goes by, I do not think about the things and the choices I made.
And it's just hurtful to look my family and friends and co-workers in the eye, knowing that I've disrespected them. I disrespected that badge that I love dearly, that I took 2 bullets for.
James Hunt was the first of the officers to come in and cooperate, and gave a tremendous amount of information about how the organization functioned, how the criminal activity was taking place. Because of his help in the case, he pled guilty to money laundering, and he received a 24-month sentence in federal prison.
And you as a law enforcement officer should hold yourself to a higher standard than that. And you shouldn't treat people like that, because that person that we beat, they got a family. And as we as law enforcement officers, we're supposed to enforce the laws, not be part of the laws.
What we have learned is that, number one, finances. People living above their means, you really need to look at it. It's no different than a drug dealer or anybody else. If someone makes a complaint on an officer, it needs to be investigated.
Little complaints that you tend to blow off mean something.
Thirdly, is that you have to check their paperwork. You have to make sure that there's quality control in paperwork. And when we did this unannounced search at this agency, it was unbelievable what was found. Guns, drugs, marijuana, cocaine, crack, unpackaged, unlabeled, in cars, in desk drawers, in filing cabinets, in lockers. No idea where it came from, who it came from, what it was for.
When certain guys don't hang with nobody else, they just hang with that certain little group of guys, like a little wolf pack. You gotta pay attention to that. You gotta pay attention to what your people are doing, spending. You gotta know what your people are buying. It's sorry to, you hate to be that way, but you have to know what your people are doing.
It only takes that one time, that one mistake to cost you your life.
The corruption in the Sheriff's Department has been a horrid chapter in the history of Robeson County, but today has been a milestone. The Sheriff of Robeson County, Glenn Maynor, pled guilty and was sentenced to 6 years in prison.
Did you guys buy any of the things that the former sheriff said today? I just got distracted. I had personal problems. I had health problems. I mean, basically that I was a good guy that just got, turned my head at the wrong time.
I'm not going to speculate on the credibility of all that. I mean, obviously a lot of people have reasons for what they do.
If he wasn't up to the job, he shouldn't have run a second term for sheriff. He says he wasn't equipped to handle the job. Well, he shouldn't have run a second term. He shouldn't have run a first term if he wasn't equipped to do it.
Well, they getting what they deserve. That's exactly what I say. Because I know what they are. They're crooks,
If the public can't rely on us and can't rely on the honesty and integrity of police officers, then they don't have much left that they can rely on. And our entire system is based upon the ability of the public to trust all of us.
It's been 6 years that we've been working on this. We're very pleased with the outcome. And I think it's going to have a very big impact on the real victims in this case, and they are the citizens of Robeson County. It gives them an opportunity to be free for the first time in a very long time from the political corruption that has been, again, as Mr. Holney said, haunting that county. I think that that's the important part.
We've got a great law enforcement community. This is just a bad situation that got out of control that we have dealt with and are dealing with. And any amount of time, any amount of effort, any amount of resources that we have to expend to root out that 1/100th of 1% out there of law enforcement that have chosen to break their oath is worth it.
I just want any of them to know that's doing it to stop. And if you're thinking about it, don't do it, because of what kind of effect it's going to have on you.
It's hard. I mean, it is hard, because at the end of the day, I'm sitting up here and these law enforcement officers are pleading guilty, but I still have a sad place in my heart, because law enforcement has now been given a black eye. We don't feel good about doing these investigations. We don't like doing these investigations, but we have to do them. And we do them because we want the citizens on the street to trust us.